What's up guys, Asian here with another PTS video, and like I promised yesterday, today we're going to be going over how I would build a werewolf tank as of the Greymoor patch. So just keep in mind that this is still fairly early in the PTS cycle. It's only the second week of the PTS, so things might change here and there, but I'll be going over how I would build a werewolf tank, as well as the weaknesses and drawbacks, as well as the strengths, of course, of making a werewolf tank. So first, what exactly happened with werewolves in Greymoor that made them possible to tank? Well, the big thing came with the change to one of the sets that we're running here. That is the set known as Tormentor. So now when you deal direct damage with a charge, leap, teleport, or pull ability, you gain a certain amount of resistances and you taunt the enemy to attack you for 15 seconds. On the live server right now, it only works with charge abilities. So the actual Werewolf Pounce is not a charge ability, it's considered a leap ability. So Tormentor actually doesn't work with werewolves on the live server. So this change actually makes it possible to taunt as a werewolf now. So now that werewolves are able to taunt, we're able to actually play a werewolf tank for once. So that's one of the first downside of running Werewolf Tank is you pretty much have to wear the Tormentor set if you're going to be taunting things. That's kind of the job of a tank, to be able to taunt things. In Werewolf form, you don't have access to the Sword and Shield taunt, you don't have access to the range taunt from the Undaunted line, so you're pretty much relying on Tormentor in order to basically be able to taunt things. Now, Tormentor is a heavy dungeon set, which is from Banished Cells. So this is a base game set, so relax, everybody's able to get this set here. Everybody's able to make use of the Werewolf tank. So that's the first sort of downside, and basically the first required part of any Werewolf tank, being able to wear the Tormentor set. Now, in terms of abilities that have changed, Pack Leader now serves more of a tanking function now. You still get a 30% additional stamina increase, you get a 10% additional damage mitigation, plus you get the 2 direwolves, and now you also grant minor courage to everybody around you. So one of the big things with running Tormentor is the fact that you pretty much have to give up a group utility set in order to run Tormentor. This actually makes it kind of a wash, because the only other way to get minor courage right now is from Yolnakreen. So if you're able to get it by using Pack Leader, then you pretty much have a built-in Yolnakreen as a werewolf. So it doesn't really matter that you're running Tormentor, because hey, now you're also providing the group utility of Yolnakreen without actually wearing Yolnakreen. So this actually ends up being a pretty nice bonus to werewolf tanks now, so you're not actually giving up that much when you're running Tormentor. Now we have things like Feral Pounce, which is a big change for DPS. For tanks, though, Feral Pounce will now give us 100 stamina back, so we have a little bit of additional stamina sustained now, and also still maintains extends the Werewolf transformation by 1 second. So as long as we're able to use Feral Pounce and are dealing damage with the Werewolf passive that gives us an extended duration on a Werewolf timer, we should be able to maintain Werewolf form for a pretty reasonable amount of time. If not indefinitely, depending on how many adds we have between boss fights. Ursyn's Fortitude still scales off for max health, obviously, but if we're at full health, we actually get stamina back when we use Ursyn's Fortitude instead. So just another way to get some stamina sustained back, plus when we use it, we also get some health and stamina regen as well, based on how much healing we get, up to a maximum of additional 666 stamina and health regen. Minor bonuses, but the main thing is that now we have a way of basically returning stamina back that isn't relying on heavy attacking, which can be a little bit tricky if you're kind of new to tanking, because you do have to be able to know the mechanics and basically heavy attack at the right time, so you're not getting heavy attacked by the boss. Then we have Deafening Roar, which still fears enemies for 4 seconds, so you still have a hard CC, and you now have a source of off balance as well. So now with Deafening Roar, you don't necessarily need to have people running lightning staves anymore. I mean, you still should in order to, just make sure you have off balance up all the time, but you don't necessarily need to use them anymore as long as you're able to use Deafening Roar once the off-balance immunity has gone away. Plus, Deafening Roar now also applies Major Fracture and Minor Maim, so you're still able to give out those 2 important debuffs. Do keep in mind, though, that you still are not able to provide Major Breach. That still needs to come from somebody else. Typically, it's going to be a healer using Elemental Drain, but if you're running like a Stamina DPS heavy group, then you have Major Fracture, you have the Minor Maim to help reduce damage that's incoming to the group, so you have those two kind of additional debuffs that you would normally get from the Sword and Shield taunt. So again, just a little bit of additional help here for Werewolf tanks. Next we have Howl of Despair, which hasn't changed too much. The big thing is that enemies who face you take a little bit more damage from the attack. You're still going to be running this for the additional Feeding Frenzy synergy, just to help out your DPS here to deal more damage. Then, of course, Claws of Life as an additional heal over time component. That just helps out our little health sustain there. We still have Hercian's Fortitude for a burst heal, but it's nice to have a little bit of a hot going as well. So pretty much you have to use these abilities here. So all these ability changes do kind of play in to the whole Werewolf tank idea here. Now, one of the things with Werewolf tanks that is a little bit challenging is the fact that you won't be able to use Symphony of Blades anymore, because Symphony of Blades requires you to heal somebody else to grant them the bonus, and all of your heals are basically just self-heals. You don't have any sort of group heals, so you won't be able to use Symphony of Blades. So instead, you're going to have to wear something like Lord Warden. You might even be able to use something like Chudan. So if we go into Monster Helm sets here, and that's Celine's, we don't want that. Go into Marsh Helms and go take a look at Chudan. We don't actually have a source of Major Resolve, so we don't have that buff built into our toolkit. So you might want to consider running Mighty Chudan in order to get Major Resolve. You also still get some additional resistances and some additional health. One of the downsides of running a Werewolf tank is you, typically speaking, will have lower health than other tanks here. Take a look at our character sheet, for example. We have 31.8k max health here. This is on a Dark Elf. We have 40 points into health, so if you're something like an Imperial or a Nord, this might be a little bit better, but you're still going to have lower health than a traditional tank. So that's one of the downsides of running a Werewolf tank. You do have lower max health. Over on the topic of our max stats, though, one of the bonuses is you get 30% additional max stamina, so you have a huge stamina pool to make use of here. We have almost 31k stamina here, so running out of stamina is not really going to be that big of an issue here, especially with Feral Pounce and Hercian's Fortitude giving back stamina in those conditions there. So overall, your max health is going to be lower, but your max stamina is going to be higher. So that's kind of the trade-off you're making there in Werewolf form. Beyond that, the other thing to keep in mind is that Tormentor here, you can wear it on the body or you can wear it as a weapon set. Now keep in mind that while you are in Werewolf form, you can't bar swap. So right now I am on my front bar here, and so this is one of the things you got to keep in mind here, that you don't inherit any sort of weapon passive bonuses, but you do inherit enchants and weapon traits. So when you are going into Werewolf form, make sure you are on a two-handed infused Crusher enchant if you're responsible for maintaining Crusher. Now, because of this, and because you might not necessarily maintain Werewolf form throughout an entire boss fight, you might still want to put it on the Sword and Shield bar, in which case you might want to swap out the enchants. That way you're not stuck with the weaker Crusher enchant from having a one-handed sword. The other option is, of course, you have somebody else run the Crusher enchant, and then you can run a different enchant in response to that. So that way you can maintain that Sword and Shield on your front bar in case you happen to drop out of Werewolf form. That's the other big weakness of being a Werewolf tank. If you do happen to drop out of Werewolf form, you're not going to be as useful, because obviously you're basically missing one full armor bonus here, one utility set, because you have Tormentor here, and you're not generating ultimates in Werewolf form, so you will not be able to use things like Warhorns, and if you do drop out of Werewolf form, you have to build up the 255 ultimate again, or I think it's actually higher than that. I'm on a Sorc, so I have lower ultimate cost. But you will have to build up your ultimate again to transform back into Werewolf form. So if you have a Werewolf tank, you won't be getting Warhorns at all. So that's one of the bigger weaknesses of running a Werewolf tank here. So with all these weaknesses in mind, Werewolf tanks do have one strength, and that is they can deal a lot of damage because they have much higher max stamina and much higher weapon damage than your traditional tank. So that basically allows you to kind of be this sort of hybrid DPS tank scenario here. Now, what that basically means is that for vet trials, it's going to be a little bit hard for me to recommend doing Werewolf tanks because of all those drawbacks that you have. Not saying it's going to be impossible, but it's definitely going to be limited to the easier vet trials, things like the vet Craglorns, potentially some of the easier vet hard mode Craglorns, for example, maybe Maw of Lord Kaj, maybe some of the easier vet DLC configurations, but you're not going to be able to tank things like Cloud Rest +3 or Asylum +2 as a Werewolf. You're just giving up too much, and those trials are just too hard and require a lot more group coordination than what a werewolf is able to provide. So that is one thing that I think that werewolf tanks won't necessarily be able to do. You won't be able to do those things like VML hard mode. You won't be able to do things like Asylum +2, just because you're giving up too much in order to play as a werewolf tank. Now, in 4-man content, though, werewolf tanks are going to be really, really powerful because essentially, like I said, you're a hybrid DPS tank. So you're able to provide that additional DPS that a traditional tank might not be able to provide. This basically allows you to do something like a werewolf tank with 3 DPS and just blow through dungeons like, like a maelstrom. So it's going to be very, very good for 4-man content, but again, I don't think it's going to be quite as strong in 12-man trials. One of the things with werewolf tanks is that it's really reliant on you maintaining werewolf form. So in a boss fight, you might be able to maintain it because you have Feral Pounce at the top of your werewolf passive, which gives you 5 seconds of additional werewolf transformation every 5 seconds. So if you're able to maintain that, you will be able to maintain werewolf form, but that's not necessarily always going to be the case. So for 4-man content, at the very least, you have ads that you can feast on in between boss fights in order to maintain your werewolf transformation. You have a pretty good chance of having pretty high time remaining on your werewolf transformation before you go into a boss fight. Plus, boss fights in dungeons tend to be a little bit faster than in trials, depending on obviously your group DPS and stuff. So you'll have more time to kind of go between ads and start feasting in order to maintain your werewolf timer in a 4-man content here. So with all that said, though, werewolf tanks, this is definitely your time to shine with the change to Tormentor and all the changes to the werewolf active abilities. Werewolf tanks are looking pretty good. Again, really, really strong, I think, kind of in 4-man content. Things like Black Rose Prison, for example, Drunkster Arena, Dungeons. Less so for trials just because of the sacrifices you have to make in order to play a werewolf tank. But this is definitely one of the best times to be a werewolf in ESO. But that is it for this video. Hopefully you guys found this informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.